Hey everyone, I just wanted to talk to all of you about my favorite American president. He was the 16th president out of currently 45. Uh, he is a man that has been revered in several textbooks, several uh, civil rights affairs, I guess. That's something that I'm not going to mention or even go into detail about because I don't particularly care about that. Um, I see everybody for how they are, as in the famous words of Martin Luther King Jr. Everybody should be judged by their actions, not by who they are or who their parents were. I digress. So this man, you may all know him. You may have learned about him in elementary or junior high. Uh, he lived in the 19th century in what would be at that time the Midwest. Well, actually, I digress. At that time, would be considered the West, but today would be the Midwest. And that man's name is Abraham Lincoln. He was born February 12th, 1809, so fairly early into the 19th century. He was a lawyer and a statesman who even taught himself how to read. He was a very well educated man. He chopped wood. He was quite the lumberman, living in Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky, I believe. Um, but anyhow, in 1861, he um, was admitted as the 16th president of the United States, um, with his vice president first being Hannibal Hamlin, which is actually from Maine, uh, the state where I live. And um, eventually it coincided to be Andrew Johnson, who would be his eventual successor, a Southern Democrat. So, the most notable thing about Abraham Lincoln is, of course, he was the president during the time of the American Civil War, and the Civil War resulting in uh, preserving the Union and freeing the African slaves that were in dominantly at the South, but not many people say that somewhere in the North. Not as often or not as commonly spoken or not even directly labeled slaves, but I digress. Uh, and by doing so, he bolstered the federal government and modernized the United States economy. But in the 1870s, with Andrew Johnson being president, that was the Reconstruction era. Very, very dark and miserable time in America. Anyways, so Lincoln was born into poverty in a log cabin and was raised on the frontier, primarily in Indiana. So, at, in the early 1800s, would have been the West. He was self-educated, became a lawyer. He was a leader in what was then the Whig Party, one of the first political factions in the American government since the United States became a country. He was a state legislator in Illinois and eventually a U.S. congressman from Illinois. In 1849, he returned to his law practice but became vexed by the opening of additional lands to slavery as a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And about that time, there's an event called Bleeding Kansas. If you're curious about that, um, just uh, leave a comment, and I'll be happy to look that up and do a video of its own for it. Another guy, John Brown. Anyways, he re entered politics in 1854, 5 years later, becoming a leader in the new Republican Party. So the Republican Party had finally came to be in the mid 19th century. And it's not how it is today. Um, for better or worse, if that makes any sense. And he reached a national audience in the 1858, 4 years later, debates against Stephen Douglas, a known abolitionist and black politician. Lincoln ran for president in 1860, sweeping the North in victory. Pro-slavery elements in the South equated his success with the North's rejection of their right to practice slavery, and Southern states began seceding from the Union. To secure its independence, the new Confederate States of America, the South, fired on Fort Sumter, a United States Army fort in the South. I believe it was Charleston, South Carolina. And Lincoln called up forces to suppress the rebellion and restore the Union. Oops, so close. It started an entire civil war. Lincoln, who was fairly moderate as a Republican, had to navigate a contentious array of factions with friends and opponents from both the then Democratic and Republican parties. His allies, the War Democrats and the Radical Republicans, demanded harsh treatment of the Southern Confederates. Anti-war Democrats, called Copperheads, despised Lincoln, and irreconcilable pro-Confederate elements plotted his assassination. He managed the factions by exploiting their mutual enmity, carefully distributing political patronage, and by appealing to the American people. His Gettysburg Address, which I'll read in a minute, appealed to nationalistic, Republican, egalitarian, so equality for everybody, feminists, buzz off, libertarian, not even like strong central government or small central government. They're just saying, by the people, for the people, and democratic sentiments. Lincoln scrutinized the strategy and tactics in the war effort, including the selection of generals and naval blockade of the South's trade. He hired and fired a lot of generals, by the way. He suspended habeas corpus in Maryland, and he averted British intervention by diffusing the Trent Affair. He engineered the end to slavery with his Emancipation Proclamation, including his order that the Army and Navy liberate, protect, and recruit former slaves. So once the Emancipation Proclamation was written, spoken, and signed in 1862, it was then the federal obligation to actually take that into action, because it's not like a piece of paper would convince the Confederates, oh yeah, okay, cool. It's not how the world works, buddy. Nice try, but anyways, he also encouraged border states to outlaw slavery, like Missouri, Tennessee, north of that, West Virginia, and all those other places. And he also promoted the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which outlawed slavery across the country. I highly recommend this one movie called Lincoln. It is a adaptation of the passing of the 13th Amendment, and might I say, a great performance from Daniel Day-Lewis as Abraham Lincoln. I highly recommend it. I've seen the reviews and I've done my research. It's fairly accurate to what actually happened. I believe Tommy Lee Jones is in that movie, as well as the senator from Pennsylvania. I highly recommend that. Lincoln managed his own successful re-election campaign later into the war. He sought to heal the war-torn nation through reconciliation. Didn't succeed. On April 14th, 1865, this was the night of the assassination. I've actually been to Ford's Theater and the Peterson House across the street, where he had later died that next morning. He was attending a play when his wife Mary, and I believe Major Rathbone and his wife, and he was fatally shot in the back of the head by a Confederate sympathizer and very famous actor of the time, John Wilkes Booth. Abraham Lincoln states that he's remembered as a martyr and hero of the United States, and often ranked as the greatest president in American history. So, one famous quote that comes from Lincoln is, "A house divided by itself cannot stand." True. Makes sense, right? What he meant by that was very clearly that the Union must remain one. All states must remain together in order to prosper, in order to live harmoniously, in peace and prosperity and all that sort of thing, Um, I can look into the Trent Affair for any of you that are interested in learning about that. And I can also look into the Emancipation Proclamation if you want to hear that. But essentially, it is a signed document that abolishes slavery, and but at the same time, the remaining 3 years of war had to actually make that be. Some plantations didn't receive that until almost the end of the war. And like I said earlier, Bleeding Kansas, John Brown. I can look into that as well if you guys are interested. Just leave a comment. But yeah, so he was shot at Ford's Theater that night, April 14th, which also conveniently is also the same night the Titanic sank. Go figure. Kind of coincidence, right? Anyways, he was shot in the back of the head. He was seeing a play called Our American Cousin, which is a comedy of the North and South relations of the time. But as John Wilkes Booth, after he had shot Lincoln, he famously had jumped from the president's box. It's a little stage where the president could sit and watch the play. He had spurs on the bottom of his boots, and it caught on the flag that was draped from the box. He had fell down, broke his ankle. Before hobbling away to attempt to escape, he had said "Sic Semper Tyrannis," which at the time was the motto of, I believe, Virginia. It's like the state motto, but it means essentially, without tyrants. Claiming that Lincoln was a tyrant. Pretty interesting. But anyways, Abraham Lincoln was one of our tallest presidents. He was roughly 6'1". He was carried amidst the crowd outside over to the nearby Peterson House. It was just a house across the street where he could lay and recover from the obvious traumatic incident he just experienced. But unfortunately, he had died the next morning, eventually from the wound. This is also a great movie adaptation. For trying to remember his name, his last name is McAvoy. He was the lead actor in the movie Wanted. He had played a phenomenal performance on the lawyer that had actually tried to defend Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt was the owner of the boarding house where John Wilkes Booth and his conspirators were residing before the events of April 14th. This is a movie called The Conspirator. Great movie. I highly suggest it. Unfortunately, it does have a sad ending. But yeah, take a look at that. It's a great movie. I love it. But yeah, what I think of the debate that I see every now and then about the Confederate flag, well, here's my 2 cents on that. So the Confederate flag, a lot of people see as the symbol of slavery. Understandable. But truly, what the Confederate flag actually was It was it was a flag that represented states' rights. The Confederacy was very intent on being individual states again, like it was back in the days of the 13 colonies. Um, but one of those rights, particularly on the plantations, was to own slaves and to keep their economy alive, especially in the farming regions of the South. Uh, so, in a way, they're not wrong, but it's just an interesting perspective that I've overseen. Uh, the flag represented states' rights, and um, the way that the Southerners saw it was one of those rights was to own slaves. Um, Slavery is immoral. Um, that's no doubt about that. Obviously, uh, most African or a lot of African tribes over in the continent of Africa had actually been um, no stranger to slavery, especially the ones who were captured prisoners of war and the warring tribes, and they saw it in Africa too. It's not just in the United States. Um, and the way that the Southerners seen it uh, uh, as a predecessor to the American Civil War era during the time of the Mid-Atlantic Passage is the reason why they went to Africa is because one, the Native Americans, they know the land better than most white Americans and Europeans. So most Southerners wouldn't have favored them as slaves. Then you have um, the so-called undesirable Europeans, the Irish, the Italians, and Eastern Europeans. They were, well, they were Europeans. They weren't. It's a really complex situation, but basically, it would have been like a new world. They don't know where they are. They don't know where they're going. That's why it was easy for Europeans to start smuggling Africans over to the plantations where they started slavery. I understand it's still a hotly debated topic after nearly 200 years. Um, but just understand that, that almost 200 years ago, um, the Confederate flag was a symbol of states' rights. One of them had, many of the Southerners had seen one of their rights to own slaves. So you're not completely wrong when you say that, or when you've made your statements. And well, not every Southerner was a slave owner. This had just reminded me there's a great series called Free State of Jones. Um, it's based off of a true story. The lead actor is Matthew McConaughey. Essentially, it is about a Southerner who sees the Civil War as a rich man, a rich plantation owner's war. Um, he didn't care about slavery. He just wanted to protect everybody around him and fight for freedom. He was a pretty interesting guy, like the real person, just as much as the character portrayed by Matthew McConaughey. But anyways, yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. Take it as you like, or if not, that's okay. But Abraham Lincoln, he was a phenomenal person for his time. He was very revolutionary in thinking, well educated, taught himself how to read. He was a very effective lawyer. And the thing about him is a lot of the times he would recite stories that he had heard throughout the years to his cabinet and to some members of his staff. Which, he had a pretty interesting sense of humor. But yeah, I really look up to Abraham Lincoln as a person. Uh, he he tried to do what was right, or at least what he deemed was right. Um, and at the same time, he knew the risks, he knew the costs. The American Civil War had taken so many lives. Um, in fact, um, I'll read the Gettysburg Address. This is a pretty somber moment in American military history as to the results of the battle. I've seen pictures of dead soldiers lying on the battlefield, and just thinking how gruesome, utterly brutal this war really was. It's something that makes me want to be awake at night. But November 19th, 1863, months after the actual battle, Abraham Lincoln had wrote what is famously known as the Gettysburg Address. Many people had come to hear him, and this is one of the few times he had not had his iconic top hat on, but it is probably one of the most quoted rhetoric in American history. Here it goes. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He is referring to the founding fathers, and when they signed the Declaration of Independence, stating that all men are created equal and that we are to be free from the reign of Great Britain. Now we are engaged in a great civil war. Pretty, short, sweet, to the point. Yep, we're in a civil war. Testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. This is where that may refer to that quote that I like, that a house divided by itself cannot stand. We are met on a great battlefield of that war, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, by the way. It is the furthest north, I believe, that General Robert E. Lee's Army of Virginia had ever gone, aside from their allies of the other southern states. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. I'm going to stop there for a second. Bear with me here. I definitely don't take this sort of thing lightly. It's something that I can't even fathom to think, to be honest with you. Just the utter sacrifice that had, came to be on this battlefield. One of many over a period of 5 years, just so a race of people could be free and that an entire nation can remain one. It's hard to fathom. It is. I'll continue on. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. He pauses a lot. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here. That, of course, this is one of the most quoted speeches in American history. Anyways, but it can never forget what they did here. He's right. I mean, any of these people in wars like this, just veterans of foreign and domestic wars, this one being domestic, no matter how long ago it was, can't forget it, especially because it has such a significant potential outcome, no matter what it is. So it is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. I like his word choice there, especially because he he says it in a more poetic way of saying that these people have died here. People have given their lives for freedom. Uh, you know, sometimes I hear public comments about military and um, you know activists, and I used to never care about politics um, in this sense, like the real sentimental stuff, not this nonsense that's going on right now. But it's just I don't know. I don't even have a the right amount of words can't even describe the disrespect that I have seen from several people in regards to veterans of all foreign and domestic wars in the past. Um, Honestly, it's the people leading it that are really responsible. Um, Whether it be the American Civil War, fighting for on one side, it's to preserve a union and to abolish the slavery of a particular race of people, or World War II, jumping ahead in time, which is kind of like hint to what I'm going to talk to another video about. Uh, it's the liberation of a different race of people, and also liberation of an entire continent um, in one theater of the war. Um, it's it's not a chess game. It's not. War's hell. It is. War really is hell. Um, I digress. That we were highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain. I hope not. That this nation, under God or whatever faith you choose to have, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Those last few words are powerful. That when when the founding fathers created this nation, the United States of America, it was supposed to be self-governance, right? So that we weren't being ruled by Great Britain and at the time King George III. We were meant to govern ourselves, to set our own boundaries back in 1776 on to 1789. Um, and that definition has definitely had its rocky edges over the years. But I really do hope that this really takes into account, especially with what's going on right now. Like, it's the people that matter, you know. It's I'm not saying this is like a PSA about to heck with the government. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are real problems that just haven't been addressed, or they're completely neglected, and something needs to be done about that. Uh, but yeah, Abraham Lincoln was an incredible guy. If you have anything else you would like me to say, or have your own opinions, free country, right? Uh, leave a comment and go from there. Have a great night. It's been CJ Money out.